So, Dominic, that's the home front, that's the residential front. What about critical industry and critical facilities? So, if Australia loses access to not only allied logistics support in a major conflict, the Indo-Pacific goes hot, or our partners are committed elsewhere. How long does the average Australian military base, hospital, critical logistics node actually last on what is currently installed?
Yeah, that's a pretty big concern, I would have thought there. Todd, I know that some of the projects and the tenders that we sort of look at, and I would have to say Volt is quite infantile, but it's one of the focus areas for the company, moving ahead from here is how we can contribute to that mission critical and critical infrastructure um, projects that we want to get into. But I don't think we've got a lot of backup there. Most systems would be just fully reliant on grid power, not a lot of backup. We do talk to some businesses about UPS systems, particularly when it comes to keeping vaccines or anything, at a certain temperature. Um, but a lot of this onus is put onto the business owners themselves to take that sort of initiative. So, there's not a lot of, I guess, subsidy or assistance for companies or organizations looking to build further resilience in those areas, and quite keen to see, particularly what defense is going to do in that sort of, um, what does that mean in terms of a project? And, does it mean that we need to look to different areas like different chemistries? Sodium is abundant. Can we, quickly turn those into cell chemistries and different types of cell formats that we can develop, closer to home at a lower cost without necessarily needing to take a ginormous financial risk on a gigafactory or processing plant, which is something that Australia is not necessarily super experienced in. But can we do that to build our resilience up to deliver power in those critical areas?
So, Dominic, I guess what we've just done then, we've established that the current posture, it's not adequate. Um, so I want to look forward now, because the technology picture, it's moving fast, and parts of it are moving in ways that most defence and infrastructure planners haven't caught up to yet. You're now running sodium ion commercially. Plainview IoT, it's live. You're in the US market through eFinery. Where does the technology roadmap actually head, and which piece does the defence and national security sector need to be paying attention to right now?
Yeah, really good question. I believe the easiest, lowest hanging fruit and the most obvious outstanding requirement is to look at battery diagnostics in the most granular way possible and use that to uh, develop performance analytics. There's lots of energy management systems. There's lots of cost-based or revenue-based energy management systems, but a lot of them just assume that the technology is going to work. And if the general view, and this is just the simple reality of what we've seen in the market, is that Australia across the board is still very much enamored with buying imported product. And, despite there being multiple policies that suggest that there's support otherwise, it's still a fact. We still like to buy imported product. We're still very keen to get the price down on these things. But what can we actually add to provide the granular analytics that we know that this thing is going to turn on when it's supposed to, or that it's going to last as long as it's supposed to? So if you're out in the field and something's, assumed to be working, how can you increase the confidence of that? I think is the simplest and lowest hanging fruit. So, from our perspective, I think, one of our big bets is that something like Plainview, which is, an IoT that can connect to multiple, battery systems without necessarily being brand aligned, can provide a source of truth to both the end user who bought the infrastructure or the component or the battery system, to be able to push back on the manufacturer and say this thing isn't actually performing to what you said it would do, or vice versa from the OEM to push back and be able to better support that from anywhere in the world to say this battery is doing exactly what it's meant to do, but I can see that how it's being operated is not how we agreed that it would happen. So providing, I guess, that middle source of truth that beyond compliance, we're looking at performance. So what is good? And we don't really know the answer to that other than just it lasted throughout its its warranty period, or it turns on and does what it says it does on the data sheet. And I don't mean to be pessimistic about that, but I think it's if you can find out and you want to know, and you can use what you know to deliver better uh, decision making.
Data, data obviously does inform better decision making with those insights and optimization and helping to enhance the experience. Dominic, I want to dig in a little bit with the sodium ion 100 AH, which is now commercially available under Volta Select. Is that right? No cobalt, no lithium. Right.
That's
So,
right. Yeah.
mm,
So we're working with a partner on that at the moment. So like I said, we're not a chemistry or a cell manufacturer uh, in that area. So we're deploying those systems into commercial. We haven't put a sodium system into anything residential at this stage.
If we're talking about also, if we're thinking about here with defence and national security, I'm thinking about ideal forward deployed systems, telcos, traffic infrastructure off grid, and then I look at what the DSTG Defence Science Technology Group published last month that one Australian manufacturer is now scaling sovereign Li ion cells for ADF underwater, air, and land platforms. Given that, so what does that mean for Volta and for Australia's sovereign capability posture that defence is finally building this from the cell level up?
Yeah, look, it's really exciting. I think from sodium in particular, I think it provides a lot of benefits um, that remove some of the complexities or risks or concerns associated with lithium. Uh, I would go on record by saying I don't think lithium technologies are unsafe, but if we are to take a broad brush and say there is concerns about lithium safety or the supply chain of lithium batteries, sodium resolves a lot of those things basically straight out of the gates. And the testing that we've done with these systems suggests that they don't need to be as complex because the stakes aren't quite as high as far as safety goes. You can, create a safety event with the sodium battery, make no mistake, but it's less likely to happen, is what we believe. And the easy wins are putting it into places where lead acid batteries are currently. So traffic systems is a really good place to start. Mobile systems where lead acid batteries are only lasting a certain amount of time. They only have a say a 50% depth of discharge, which means you can double that basically straight away and reduce the weight significantly straight away. Somewhere around 60% weight reduction compared to lead acid. And then I think it can start to infiltrate some of the lithium systems a lot more. If you follow the money trail, some of the biggest cell manufacturers like CATL, EVE are starting to do a lot more in sodium. So it's just that the technology is becoming mature, and that if some of our regulations and policies and decision makers in defense, critical infrastructure, and then right down to the consumer level start to make decisions that we're adopting this technology as sound and suitable, then I think, over the next 12 months, even less, you could see some significant changes in how people view energy storage systems and what sort of role something like sodium can play. So it's a little bit of a dip of the toe for Volta. It's not a huge resource to take up to have those batteries available, but I think they offer a lot of benefits to companies that are particularly looking for simplicity in energy storage systems.
That's very interesting. Uh, Dom, quantum batteries, the CSIRO, RMIT, University of Melbourne, they demonstrated the world's first proof of concept quantum battery capable of a full charge storage discharge cycle recently. That the scaling property is counterintuitive. It charges faster as it gets bigger. Where does that sit in how you're thinking about the next decade of energy storage?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think, I look at the people connection. So rather than the science behind it, it's just how does it integrate into, daily life, and what does that mean for us? If it means energy resilience and better access to energy when it's needed, especially when it's needed, then I'm all for it. There's a lot of projects that are at lab scale, but this one appears to be sort of leading the pack. So it's quite exciting. But we would really like to, as a company, I think, from Volta's perspective, it's great to sort of be at the cutting edge. We can't be sort of working on what's 5 years away, but I think from a company level, we can be working on what's 12 to 18 months away. And I think for these sorts of uh, pilots or demonstrations, the best thing that they can do is potentially reach out to a company like ours and look to develop, a little bit more of a commercially focused deployment because, we are, I guess, to a certain degree, the conduit between it becoming a commercial reality. And, the science behind it is great. And that's not necessarily something that we're going to be deeply involved in. We're the company that turns it from, the pilot or the engineering project into a commercially viable, consumer facing even project or product. That's what I sort of consider Volta's sort of key role to be, is that we turn all of the engineering, all the technology into something that people can actually use to turn on the lights, whether that be from the business or a personal perspective. And I think that's our role moving forward. From my personal opinion, I want to get as close to this stuff as possible because, you want to get onto the latest and greatest technology that often are built on some older principles, to be fair. But, we're seeing the necessity to build up things like the quantum battery. And, I want to be as close to that as possible so that we can, create the most amount of change and affect, the most upgrades of, existing infrastructure as possible.
So the technology exists, the capability roadmap, it's clear. What's missing, I guess, is the connection between what's commercially available, what gets into the hands of the people who need it. And you've built the thing. You manufacture it in Brisbane, and your own pipeline that's shifted. So government infrastructure, EV fleets. Your clients are starting to treat battery systems as infrastructure, not products. Talk me through what's changed in your pipeline in the last 12 months. You mentioned in your March update that the conversations are getting bigger. What's driving that shift, and what are those clients now asking that they weren't asking before?
Yeah, I think the big one that clients are asking about is remote connectivity and remote support. So I think people are understanding that once a system is deployed, and if you use a very, very broad brush and say a product is a product, it's who's behind it. So, who's installing it, and what is the experience behind that installation team, and what is their specialty, and how much experience and how much care are they going to apply in putting the system together. So it's not just does it look neat, it's just is it actually designed to be, you know, put through a cyclone, for instance, and then what is the team that's behind it? And that's kind of where I think Volta's role is starting to take shape. Is that Volta's never going to be the biggest manufacturer of products, but we can be the voice of reason and the voice of expertise around how a product is deployed. So the conversations are getting bigger in the notion that we can be involved in more things without necessarily being the sole contractor. We don't have to be the battery manufacturer. We don't have to be the only ticket that's part of a project, and we can be integrated based on expertise and how we can involve battery technology in a project rather than just sell a product at a price. Hopefully, we never hear from you again. We want to develop the longer term relationships with clients, customers, and partners about how we can work together to keep a system, lasting its full lifespan and beyond. And then, what does it look like after that? How do we deal with circularity reporting that, ESG reporting that might come up in the next, 12 to 18 months, or any sort of requirements for performance analytics and or reselling opportunities, and what does that mean for insurance and all of the expertise that comes with deploying a battery system beyond just, you know, is it going to power the lights, or is it going to reduce a power bill?
So Dominic, in your experience, is whenever there's failure, if there's failure, is it usually the technology, the policy, or the decision making once the capability already exists?
I think a failure is usually driven by a misalignment from the get go. So if an energy storage system is deployed with an expectation that it will deploy a certain amount of power per day at certain times of the day, and that's not aligned from the get go, you're setting yourself up for a potential issue. Um, you know, price is particularly in the residential space, is such a big driver, and the focus on getting that down as much as possible and be as cheap as possible. Look, I get it. Cost of living pressures, are causing a lot of indifferent decision making, or causing people to need to really seriously consider budget requirements, and that's okay. I fully understand that. We're all living that together, but these systems need to be considered for what the people and the businesses that are involved in deploying them. And if there's not enough margin, then the system can't be supported long term, which causes chinks in the armor for the supply chain of how well resourced the companies are that can support a system. It's pretty rarely technology or actual chemistry that causes a battery to fail. It's usually communications, or different types of systems or brands trying to talk to each other, and maybe even more so over the last little while, between systems trying to deal with energy management systems and revenue controls, and when to turn off and on and off, and the integration of artificial intelligence into those systems, trying to automate them as much as possible, potentially too fast. I don't know the answer to that, but potentially, you know, trying to integrate artificial intelligence decision making and automation has been done a little too quickly before we actually really understand what happens inside a battery, because there's not many people in this country who make them. So therefore, how can we really truly understand what's going on inside them to be able to automate that in the first
And
place?
having that intelligence and data is obviously critical to any household or leader as well, and that's one reason why we've built Vaxa Bureau. Dominic, everything we've discussed, it comes down to one problem. Leaders have more information than ever about energy security. They feel less certain than ever about what to do with it. The capability exists, the technology roadmap is clear, but the translation seems to be missing. Intelligence only has value if it changes decisions. So, in your mind, how should an organisation, be it a defence department, a hospital network, a logistics operator, connect what you've described today to the decisions they need to make tomorrow morning?
Yeah, I really think that those departments, defense in particular, should be looking deeper into, well, as deep as possible. I won't say deeper, I'll say as deep as possible into uh, how a company delivers that technology in the first place. So if we look at Volta as an example, it's, well, there's a product, yes, the product delivers the energy, yes, but is the expertise behind that to be able to support all of the areas of concern? Can we help with assessing the energy needs in the first place to make sure that a system is delivered that is fit for purpose? Or can we be involved in the long-term support and performance management of that asset? Because the bigger the company, we've noticed, the less they probably understand the intricacies of what a battery system is. So I think one of the things that we're really proud of is that we have that expertise in the business, not just to sell and support a system that's fit for purpose, but also when the phone rings and someone doesn't know what's going on with the system, is that we actually know how to fix it. And it's not just our gear that we know how to fix. We know the gear that our gear has to interface with, and we know how to fix that as well. And I think, government departments, defense departments, or procurement of this product should look broader than just what is the ticket price for a product, and what is the expertise behind that company. And the reality is that some of these companies that can deliver the best expertise are not big companies; they are SMEs, and we hear a lot about the integration of SMEs into the defense supply chain. But where exactly do they fit? I think that's where these departments could seriously be looking at how they integrate the expertise of what a company like ours does, and some of our supply chain. So I'd probably put it out to a company like Bohelian, another local Brisbane company, expertise from PhDs like Josh Watts out at QUT, based in Banyo. How do they integrate that sort of expertise into into their decision making? So ultimately, it ends up being a product and a purchase or a procurement, but does it have the right amount of support behind it, and is the project written in a way that integrates long term support?
So, in my mind, it comes down to probably three questions. What's our actual exposure? Why it matters to us specifically, and what do we do before the decision is made for us? I guess that's the brief, right?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Yeah, I think that's the high level brief that you can dig into, in a very granular way. But I think you've got it right. It's what is it really is what is our capability, and what's really underpinning that? Is it product? Is it supply chain? Yeah, our supply chain, we've gone through, for the last 40 odd minutes talking about how there is chinks in that armor, but can we maintain a relationship to ensure that that supply chain risk is reduced or minimized as much as possible whilst we get other expertise um, up to meet that gap? And do we, what can we do to subsidize and lift up that capability to ensure that those companies are prospering, not just surviving, because we need them and that we know that they're going to cost more to work with, but the long-term outcome has a much more beneficial effect than just continuing to purchase something from overseas and hoping it works.
Dominic, I'm going to move into a rapid fire section here. We're going to keep it fast. One sentence answers only. Mate, most underestimated sovereign capability gap in Australia's energy sector right now, and it's not manufacturing volume.
It would come down to engineering expertise.
One technology that boards and government are still underestimating, given everything that's changed in the last 6 months.
So you liar.
One early warning signal that every infrastructure risk dashboard should be tracking today that most aren't.
I would have to say the biggest risk would be logistics based on current political concerns.
The last one, the single thing you'd change about how Australia approaches sovereign manufacturing if you had the minister's ear for 5 minutes.
Do you make it here? And the stuff that you make here, who makes that? Who makes what you make and who's involved?
Great answers.
Not just, is it an ABS?
Great answers. Great answers. Dominic, we've covered a lot of ground today. The design discipline behind Volta, what China's export controls and the pause actually means, what resilience look like when it's tested, where the technology's heading. But before we close, I want to come back to something we touched on early. You said that sovereign capability requires decisions that aren't being made yet, which means this doesn't resolve on its own. So for the leaders listening today, what is the single biggest mistake leaders make when they're thinking about energy security? Not the obvious mistake, the one that costs the most that they don't realize that they're making.
I think the single biggest mistake they're making is thinking that it's a product concern, is that it's a nuts and bolts and a procurement concern. It's the people and the personnel and the expertise behind it that is going to make this work. So it's installers. There's not enough of them. And if you talk to an electrical or solar and battery installer, whether it's residential or commercial or anywhere along that, they are under the pump at the moment, and they are holding a lot of the risk, and they need to be nurtured through this process, through this transition. And then the technology companies like mine, how do we get lifted up? How do we get legitimately supported that we are part of the energy transition and being a critical part of energy resilience in this country?
And Dominic, final question. If you could put one question in front of every CEO, minister, every infrastructure planner who might be listening, one question that they walk into their office with tomorrow morning and put to their team, what is it?
What does it cost you if the lights don't turn on?
That's vital. That's brutal. It's a reality.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. But what is it going to cost? Yeah. Every business will need to deal with this in some form. What does it matter to you financially if the lights don't turn on?
Dominic, I want to thank you, mate. That was wonderful.
Thanks, Todd. Much appreciated, mate.
That's the capability question in a sentence. Not more products, not more policy. Better decisions made before the disruption forces them. What's the exposure, why it matters, and what to do next. That's the brief every leader needs. That's what Vaxa Bureau is built to deliver. If today's conversation opened a question in your organisation that you don't yet have the answer to, the Knowledge Hub is where you start. vaxabureau.com. You've been listening to Intelligence Optimised. Be ready for today, prepared for tomorrow.